My name is Holly Wilson. I'm the pastor of Care and Community here at University. I'm thrilled that you're all here. This is an effort that's been a long time coming. It's been the work of many. I want to introduce to you a team of folk along with Sarah Ryder in the back, putting up chairs. This is our mental health initiative team. The folks here at this table, they're the ones who have helped develop the survey that we sent out last fall. They're the ones who have helped look at what has happened, what the results were, and through prayer and discernment, this team has developed these 6 talks that we'll have to start tonight and go on for the next 5 weeks. Looking at, and Steve Welch, who's not at that table. Steve is part of our group too, and Steve is our church counselor. Newly coming on staff to be our church counselor. So I want you all to know these faces. Let me start us with prayer, and then I'll get us moving in the right directions of what else is going to happen tonight. If you'll join me in prayer. Gracious God, fill this space with the power of your Spirit. Those who are uncomfortable being in this space, give them peace. Help us to use this time, Lord, that would point folks to healing and hope and to your presence in the good things and the hard things. We give you this time and we give you ourselves. In Christ we pray. Amen. So I just have a couple of announcements before I kick it off to our mental health initiative team. The first thing I want you to know, many of you have asked me and have said, oh, I'm so sorry that my friend isn't here, or I wish my daughter who's out of town was here. This is being recorded, hopefully. That's the camera. It's being recorded and it won't be live streamed, but it will be archived on our website. It may take us a while to do that, but it will be coming. And so if there's somebody that you think, oh, I wish my mother would have heard that, it will be online and people can access it in the weeks to come. So that's the first announcement. Second is, I want to be real clear about what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about general mental health and general mental illness. And I know some of you are in this room because you suffer from anxiety or depression, or you're here because a family member does, or that you're suffering with some addiction issues, or that trauma is part of your story. We're going to touch on all of those things over the next 5 weeks. What we're not going to deal with are the major issues and that are very complicated. Things like schizophrenia, bipolar, the really heavy duty mental illnesses. We're not going to talk about those specifically. I think there's things that you can gain and glean from this, but I want to be clear straight off the bat. We're not talking about those major, really complicated issues. Am I saying that right, Mental Health Initiative team? Yes. Okay. So we're going to start out just giving a general background and overview about what mental health is. We're going to talk about the risks, why some people seem to be more prone to it than others, why it seems to happen. I'm going to let the clinicians do a lot of that talking. Then I'm going to be talking some about theology. Why does the church care about this? Where is God in the midst of this? We're going to talk a little bit about hope, and then we're going to talk a little bit about resources that are out there. At the very end, there'll be time for question and answer. So if you're hearing something as the talks are going that you're like, I'm going to want to follow up on that, make a note, because we'll have time for question and answer at the end. And then, if we're good stewards of our time, which I'm going to be really hoping that we are, I'm going to be working toward that, there's going to be about 20 minutes or so at the very end. There are some folk in this room that are willing to have one-on-one conversations with you. If there are issues that you want to talk about with our mental health initiative team, with me as a pastor, with Steve, our church counselor, with Sarah, our director of community ministries, and there are some Stephen ministry folk in the room as well that can field some of the questions that you might want to have one-on-one. But with that being said, I'm going to kick it off to Dr. David Catterdahl. And thankful for his work, thankful for this whole team. I want to applaud you guys. Without them, we wouldn't have done this. But Dave's going to get us started here.
Thank you, Holly. When I was in middle school, my mother, who was the linchpin of our family, suddenly sank into an episode of depression, which lasted months. And that summer, she would put breakfast on the table and retreat to the bedroom, and we wouldn't see her. We practically didn't see her for 3 months. One day, in fact, we suddenly realized she's not in the house. My father, fortunately, was on the weekend. He was able to get in the car and roam around the neighborhood looking for her. It was a pretty traumatic episode for me as a child, and in fact, it probably is the whole reason I'm standing here tonight, because of that. And I think even if you don't suffer with one of these experiences, my guess is you've been touched by mental illness, or you will be touched in your life by it in some way. So that's how I want to kick things off. So how common are these problems? Okay. There we go. So this slide shows you the lifetime prevalence of these disorders. Let me highlight a couple of things here. So as you'll see, almost 50% of men and women will experience what's labeled as spousal abuse. It's really intimate partner violence at some point in their lives. And we think about women in this category, but men are showing that they've experienced this too. All right? Now the reason we get concerned about women is because, number one, the men, if they're violent, they're more frequently violent than the women are. The level of violence is greater, and because of size differences, they're much more likely to inflict serious bodily harm than a woman is. But they're experiencing violence too, all right? The second thing I want to point out is childhood trauma. So what you see is over 25% of adults were victims of physical violence as children, over 20% sexual abuse, and over 10% psychological abuse. This is a trauma-laden society, and it's reflected in this slide. All right? These are faces you may recognize. These are the rich and famous, and they suffer from the same problems we do. All right? So yes, most of these are entertainment, in the entertainment field, because of course in our culture we're addicted to finding out every sort of detail of every celebrity we ever read about. But there's also people here that are sports figures. Michael Phelps, Earl Campbell. So the women may not know who Earl Campbell was, but the men probably do. All right? Richard Nixon suffered from physical abuse as a child. Abraham Lincoln is believed to have had generalized anxiety disorder. Right? So this goes across the population. So how disabling are these problems? So this next slide shows you how many of the people with these disorders are impaired. So what you see at the top there is unresolved childhood trauma is felt to be associated with 100% impairment. So if you've not dealt with that abuse as a child, it's going to affect your life in some way. It may affect your work, your family life, your social life, but it will affect you until you deal with it. All right? PTSD. Look, major depression there. 80% of people experience moderate or severe impairment from their disorder. These are extremely disabling disorders. The other thing I want to point out on the slide is, so when we think about suicide, we think about, oh, this person's depressed. Look at these other disorders that are also associated with suicide risk. Most of these disorders increase your risk of attempting or considering suicide. All right. So if you have one of these disorders, are you more likely to have another one? The answer is yes, and it doesn't matter which disorder you have, you're more likely to have any and all of the other disorders, right? Because they're all associated with each other. So you might guess, maybe it's common to have more than one disorder. So the next slide shows you the lifetime occurrences of more than one disorder. So if we look at the left, these are mental disorders. So the first thing you'll notice is 54% of people, adults, said that they have never had a mental disorder. Okay, so that sounds great, but the problem is 46% have had at least one disorder, that means. Almost half of the population has had at least one disorder. The other thing I want you to notice is only 18% have a single disorder. So if you have one of these disorders, odds are you have more than one. All right? It's unusual for you to only have one. Okay? The other side of the coin here is looking at childhood trauma. For this study, they considered not just psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. They also considered trauma being if you were in a household where your parents were beating up on each other. That counted. If you were in a neighborhood where you witnessed violence in the community, that counted. All right? So again, what you see here is 35% of adults said they had experienced no childhood trauma. 2/3 have experienced at least one form of trauma as a child. That's huge. And once again, how many? Only 26% had one source of trauma as a child. So again, if you experienced one, you're more likely to have had more than one source of trauma as a child. So what does this all mean? So this means the messages are, if you have one of these disorders, you are not alone. You're in really good company. There's a lot of people out there who are sitting in the same boat you are. Number two, these disorders are very disabling. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. They're impactful. They affect your lives. And number three, multiple conditions are common. So you may think, oh, I've got anxiety, so I know I've got an anxiety disorder. I don't need to come to the other talks. I'll wait till the anxiety talk, okay? But you may be wrong, okay? You may have more than one disorder here. So, do you have this disorder just because you're kind of a weak person, you know? There's something basically wrong with you emotionally that you couldn't cope with this? Well, the next slide looks at genetics and family environment. So almost all of these disorders run in families. Only PTSD has not been shown to run in families. Now that doesn't mean it's genetic, right? Because, so for example, if you grew up in a household where dad beat up on mom, you are going to be more likely as an adult to abuse your wife. Okay? That's not because it's genetic necessarily, it's just that's the environment you grew up in and that became imprinted on you. All right? But in fact, as you see, most of these disorders have been linked to one or more genes. All right? So again, what this tells you is, if you have one of these problems, you were probably predisposed to having them. It is not your fault. It is not because you're a weak person and you couldn't handle stress that you got these problems. All right. Is this something that, does this really affect you, or can you just kind of slough it off? Are you just being dramatic? All right. These disorders affect your body, and they're affected by your body. So this slide shows you neurotransmitters that have been linked to the different disorders. So neurotransmitters are chemicals in your brain that are involved in communicating between nerve cells so that your brain functions properly. So most of these disorders are believed to be associated with imbalances in those chemicals. So your brain is not functioning correctly. All right? In addition, many of these problems are associated with changes in hormones in your body. So your body's just not working right. It's not working the way it was designed to work. All right? So these are real disorders. They're associated with chemical imbalances in your body. They're not imaginary. They're not made up by you. They're not all in your head. They're real disorders. What I want to show you now are how the brain works. So these are going to be PET scans taken of the brain. So MRIs, CAT scans, they look at the anatomy of the brain, all right? PET scans look at how the brain is functioning. It's looking at the metabolism in the brain. So what I want to encourage you to do as I go through these is they're in pairs. So they will show the brain of somebody who has this disorder versus somebody who doesn't have the disorder. Don't compare different disorders because each pair is done with different techniques, and so they may be different when you look. So what you should compare is the healthy brain versus the one with the disorder. So if we look at the first one, so this is a victim of chronic abuse. And hopefully you can see there's a difference over here. So the healthy brains are going to be the ones vertically in the center of the screen. All right? So the temporal lobes are basically not working here. Right? So red is hot. So red means that's an area of high activity. Blue means that it's an activity area of low activity. Black means there's nothing happening there. All right? It's as if this person lost their temporal lobes. If you look at the bottom, so this is a person with PTSD versus the healthy brain is in the middle here. So you can see there's a much different level of activity here in this brain than in this brain. All right, next there's substance abuse. So on the top here, we're looking at, so the center one is the normal healthy brain. The one over here is a person who's chronically abusing alcohol. Basically, the brain's shut off, right? You're not seeing much activity here. The bottom one is looking at a control subject versus somebody who's chronically on methamphetamines. So again, you see there's differences in the levels of activity. Finally, so the top one here is looking at depression. So again, here's the controls, the healthy ones in the middle. So look at the level of activity here in the depressed brain versus the non-depressed. Again, the depressed brain is looking almost like the person who is on alcohol, right? Again, there's low levels of activity in multiple areas of the brain. This is panic disorder. This is a person with panic disorder. This is a healthy control. And again, you're seeing there's major areas here that are not very active. There's not much going on here in these areas of blue, which don't correspond over here. And finally, this is a person with generalized anxiety disorder versus the healthy control. And again, look at all the red you're seeing here. So there's multiple areas that are overactive in this brain. Okay? So the bottom line here is you just can't turn it off, okay? Your brain's not working right. You can't just shut it off. It's not going to work that way. So in summary, number one, you're not alone if you have one of these problems, all right? Almost half of the adults in this country have at least one of these problems in their lifetime. Secondly, is mental disorders cause impairment and they increase the risk of suicide. Often there are more than one disorder present. So if you have one, you're more likely to have another one. I want to encourage people to come at 5 o'clock next Wednesday to participate in the mental health screening, where we're going to have instruments for you to complete to look at all these disorders. It'll give you an idea of maybe you should be thinking about more than one problem here. So number two, if you have one of these things, you are probably predisposed to it, either genetically or within your family. It is just not your fault. Number three is it's physiologic here. These are real disorders the way diabetes and hypertension are. Okay? It's not imaginary. There are changes in the brains, the neurotransmitters, the hormones. These are actual disorders. And finally, is you can't shut it off on your own. You're going to need help to do that. All right? So let me turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Dave.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming today. I did want to just camp on one thing that Dr. Dave mentioned he had a really good slide of suicide risk for people. And as I looked at that, I thought, if you didn't look closely, you might think that 100% of the people that had experienced abuse were all going to commit suicide. That is not true. Okay, I think what that's saying is that the risks are greatest with that group. And suicide, in fact, while it's a very serious problem, has a very low probability of occurring. And that's a whole talk into itself. Mental health symptoms. Why me? Any cats in the audience here? Oh, good thing. All right.
Try the down arrow.
Down. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health problems. It's a matter of risk and resilience. There are risk factors that make anyone more likely to develop mental illnesses at any point in time. Certain life experiences challenge our coping resources. It can be a single event, could be multiple events. Okay? When stresses exceed our ability to cope, that's when we develop problems. Individuals vary widely in the degree to which they can bounce back and cope in the face of stress. It's a little like a basketball or a soccer ball. When it's well inflated and everything's working well, and bounce it, it'll bounce right back. But when it's stressed, or it has a hole in it, or it gets flat, it doesn't work. So what is stress? By the way, does everyone believe that all stress is bad? You know, some stress is good, but again, it's the extent of the stress that you experience and the types of stress you experience. So, stress is a relationship between the person and the environment that we experience as exceeding our ability to cope with it, and it endangers our well-being. That's what makes the bad stress. Most people are affected by enduring or ongoing experiences over which they have no control. How many of you have control of all the stressors in your life? We have a very honest group here. That's good, because it's true. But stress worsens when we have what we call misattributions. It's where we identify the stress or the sources as inaccurately, that we're not sure quite where they're coming from. Maladaptive coping responses, bad ways of coping with stress, and not understanding how stress and coping interact and how coping can help any of us deal with our stressors. High stress is a risk factor for health, physical health, and mental health conditions. And Dr. Dave mentioned a few things about different mental disorders, but physical stress and physical disorders also occur when people have high stress conditions. And we can experience stress cognitively, emotionally, or physiologically. All right, risk versus resilience. It's sort of a matter of balance. And some of the risks are on the right-hand side here. I'll use my cat chaser. A biological predisposition. We already heard a lot about that. Some people are just predisposed to respond to stress. Socioeconomic status. Unfortunately, I'd say just because it's my own value structure, those who have more resources in life are more likely to be able to cope with stressors. Those of us with less resources, less money, poorer, we just don't have the resources to access care. And so folks in that socioeconomic group are more subject to stress reactions. Insecure attachment, inadequate supports. When infants are born, and I assume we have at least one infant, infants bond to their parents to their infants. But there's a wide range of bonding between parents and their children. And that creates a sense of either attachment that's secure or insecure. And an insecure attachment, lack of emotional supports, can make us very poor stress responders. Traumatic events, including workplace or school violence, and we hear all too much about that. in today's news. It's very prevalent and very unfortunate. Chronic or cumulative stressors. How many people have had a day in your life? Just think back. Don't tell me about it, but car gets a flat tire. You're late to work. Your boss yells at you. Your kids call and say they forgot to do their homework. Your spouse says he got fired from his job. You come home, there's a traffic wreck on 410. You walk in your house, and your house is on fire. Cumulative stressors can really create risks for you. Parental divorce with high conflict. That's sort of a no-brainer. That just creates a bad family environment for folks. Natural disasters. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, you name it. And then the loss of a child, that is probably one of the strongest and most severe losses that an individual or a family can suffer. And it's something that you learn to cope, but I don't think you ever really get over that. Now, resilience, things that contribute to resilience and recovery, these are the strengths that you can develop or use to balance against some of these risks. Adaptive coping, humor, positive mental attitude, a good support system, positive and secure attachments. We're in a church environment, certainly spirituality, meaningful life activities, pets, exercise, and giving back to others. These are all ways that help you become more resilient and push back against the stress. I think someone once said that you don't need to ask for life to be easy. You need to pray that you can be strong to help deal with the stresses you're going to experience. And so serving others, giving back can help there too. All right. Oops. All right. Here are some examples of stressful life situations that increase risk for folks now or in the past. And you can look through these. They fall under life stressors, stressful relationships, and interpersonal stressors. Hopefully you can anyone not see that from the back?
I can't see it.
Oh, because I'm in your way. But essentially, you're just looking at general life stressors, stressful relationships, and interpersonal. These are things inside yourself. You carry with you your own perfectionism, self-criticism, and so on. These all increase risk.
Well, Kevin, I'm all over that page.
Stress.
Yeah, stress.
So, in summary, anyone can develop mental health symptoms. Okay? And I want to point out that just because you have symptoms does not mean you have a disorder or a diagnosis. Normal people, everyone in this room, develops mental health symptoms at one time or another. It's part of life. Some factors make a person more at risk for mental health problems and a diagnosis, including, as Dr. Dave mentioned, heredity, life stressors, and other issues. And most mental health problems tend to arise when coping resources become maladaptive or cannot manage in the face of overwhelming stress. And that's it.
I don't have slides, but I do have a timer. I'm going to set my clock here timer for 8 minutes. And so when it goes off, I'll know I need to bring it to a close. So why are we talking about this stuff at church?
Because we're people.
We're talking about this stuff at church because we believe in a God that cares deeply about our lives, and that when we hurt and in our brokenness, God is present. I'm going to pick that up in a minute, but Dr. Richard Brake sent me a list of things that he hears people in his office as a clinician say about mental illnesses and mental issues when they come in to see a therapist. So listen to these. Maybe I should just pray more. Have more faith. If I was in his plan, this wouldn't be happening. I wouldn't be struggling with this. Why me? Why would a good God allow this? I thought my faith was strong. I've been praying constantly. So why hasn't this been healed or resolved or removed? What does this mean about me? What have I done to deserve this? I'm gonna stop right there. Anybody had those kinds of thoughts?
I haven't had the thought, I've been told.
By Pastor Holly?
I was told that there's somebody out there that I needed to forgive, and
Yeah.
once I forgave them, I would feel better.
Yeah. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If God knew me before I existed, does that mean He's causing this for some reason? Does this mean I'm not really saved? Where is God when I hurt or when I suffer? Why is He silent to my prayers? How can faith even help with this? All of those questions, which I think are natural and normal questions, and I'll tell you, I have suffered with both depression and anxiety. I was very public in a sermon recently about our family situation of dealing with addiction and recovery. I've sought treatment of therapists when I needed it, and I have sought treatment with medication when I needed it for those issues. And I'll tell you that even though I know all this stuff, and I have a degree, I've won awards, and I know who God is, and even still, every time I've needed help, I have thought, why is this happening to me? Can't I just pray this away? If God loved me, this wouldn't be happening. Those are lies. So if you're sitting in this room because you have something like this going on in your life, a mental illness or some of these symptoms, if you're sitting in this room because you love somebody that has a mental illness or some of these symptoms, I want to say to you, God loves you. There is nothing that you have done to deserve this. We live in a broken world. We don't live in the Garden of Eden, right? That's the simple way to answer that question. These things happen because we ain't in the Garden of Eden. But God's plan for each one of us is life and life abundant. And so I believe very firmly that as a church, we have to look at where abundant life isn't happening for people and do something about it. And quite frankly, I don't know exactly what to do next, but we're going to start talking about it. And so all of these things also remind me of the book of Job. I love the book of Job. I love Job. Because the book of Job undoes some really bad theology that's in my bones and your bones, and it's something that it's my second thought. And Job, as the book of Job starts, the idea is if you do bad things, you get bad things. If you do bad, you get bad. Now, you might not think that you believe that, but I bet you if you know somebody who, I don't know, got a DWI, you do bad, you get bad. But they might have an illness like addiction that's as real as heart disease. Or what about, I don't know, parents do this all the time. You'll see somebody's kid that's gone off the rails and you'll think, you'll be real sweet to their face, but in the back of your head you might be thinking, golly, I wonder what's going on in their house. It's in the back. Even good people, we think you do bad, you get bad. And Job reverses that because he's this blameless guy. He's the best guy there is. And a whole bunch of bad stuff happens to him. Job, the story of Job is a reality that I think is hard for us to deal with, which is bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people. Good people have anxiety and depression issues. Good people, like my beloved husband, has the disease of alcoholism. He didn't do anything to deserve that. It is his responsibility to manage that. It's my responsibility to manage my anxiety and my depression. But there's no black mark on my soul. There's no black mark on Blaine's soul. When God opens the book of life, He doesn't say, yeah, that Blaine Wilson, wow, what a screw up. Let's give him alcoholism. Any more than God says, that Joanna, she deserves an illness. Let's give her that. That's not who God is. That's just not who God is. That's just not who God is. But who God is the one who says, I'm there with you. That's what the life of Jesus is all about. So I have a bunch of crosses on my wall in my office, and I'm not really a cross kind of gal. You know, like I don't wear the cross around my neck. I'm not super Jesus-y though. I love him. But you know, I don't have the world crosses in my house. I don't wear the bakery stuff. I'm not super churchy. But those crosses are on my wall for a reason. When people come into my office and they talk about the brokenheartedness in their life, and a lot of them do, and a lot of them are around mental illnesses, and a lot of them are around loving someone with addiction, and a lot of them are about, why did this bad thing happen? I look at those crosses and I talk to people about it. Our story is not a story that avoids pain. Our story is not a story of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Our story is about a Savior who embraced pain rather than ignore it, and through his love could transform the worst thing that could happen, which is death, right? And through his love, we have the empty tomb of Easter. And so the cross is our story, that we're shaped by the cross. And so that's why we have to talk about this in the church, because there's a heck of a lot of suffering. I thought 10 people were going to come tonight. Look around this room, it's full. We had to pull out chairs. You may not be suffering, but you obviously know somebody that is. Or why are you here? And so the church has to find a way to speak into the pain of this world. And we have to speak to it through the love and grace of God, which says, that takes minutes, that says, when bad things happen to you, I'm there. Just like I was there on a hill in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago when Christ died for us. And the brokenness of his life, he embraces the brokenness of our lives, which isn't just about sin, however you want to talk about sin. It's about the real things that there are mental illnesses in our life, the things that break our spirits, the things that make us not have life and life abundantly. And so wherever abundant life isn't happening, the church has to speak into that. So that's why we're talking about it. And I'll end by saying you can't pray these things away. But if one of Kevin's slides, the last one had all the different things on the side, like spirituality, and the last one was finding something to do like service. Every single thing that he listed that could help reduce the risk of mental, is that what that column was?
Resilience.
The resilience, that helps us be more resilient. Every single one of those things is the church. It's community. Find a small group, sing in the choir, find a Bible study. It's spirituality, it's deepening our connection with God. Purpose? Oh my goodness, if you need something to do, I can put you to work. In meaningful ways, where you recapture that beautiful image that you and I were made in. Okay, who am I turning it over to? Oh, okay.
Hello, I am Dr. Pat Pernicano, but here at the church, just Pat. My topic is the healing process, mind, body, emotions, and spirit. You know, the healing process for each of these mental illnesses is a little different, but there's some things that go across all conditions. So what is healing? Healing is an empowering, transformative, restorative process. It's strengths-based. We believe that you move from illness or a victim, a feeling of being a victim, to a survivor, but finally, with God's help and with other people, a thriver, which is really a whole different mindset. Healing involves understanding and accepting that mental illness is not due to personal weakness or any lack of faith. Healing is learning to live a meaningful life worth living with mental illness. not running from it or hiding from it or denying it or, it's time we can come out of the closet and just live with it. The process of healing. Pastor Ben on Sunday said, we all have cracks and we are all broken. And then I knew what story I had to read for you all tonight. Because I'm also a storyteller and I write stories. And the minute he said cracked and broken, I said, Holly, I changed the story. I'm doing a different story. So I'm going to read you a story about cracks and brokenness and healing. And what I want to do is I'm going to kind of shut the lights off so that I want you to listen to the story. It's called The Cracked Glass Bowl. You are the bowl. That's the only instructions I need to give you, is that you are the bowl and you can listen to the story from that perspective. I use this story a lot in my work, and I do feel like I've felt God's healing through the story. So, the cracked glass bowl. The small green-colored glass bowl bobbed up and down in the now calm ocean. A powerful hurricane had hit with sudden force, and she had been lifted off the ground and flung into the pounding rain and disorienting darkness. She slowly opened her eyes and said, "It's a wonder I survived the storm." Devastation was all around her. There were uprooted trees, broken objects, and debris scattered as far as the eye could see. Then the green glass bowl saw her reflection in the water and gasped in shock and dismay. She had 100 small cracks on her surface and 2 long cracks that went all the way through, with straw and dirt embedded in them. There were deep gouges and large chips missing on her edges. "The storm has damaged me," she cried out in anguish. "I will never be the same." "I'm all alone," she thought as she floated toward shore, but then she heard, "Oh, there you are. I was so worried about you. Thank God you survived the storm." It was her friend, the Blue Bowl, who escaped the storm and came looking for her. Blue Bowl offered support and a safe place to stay because the cracked glass bowl was broken and fragile. Without the support, she would have fallen apart in pieces. After a few days with her friend, the cracked glass bowl said, "I don't know how to get on with my life. I'm not the bowl I used to be. People look away when they see me, and I hate the changes in myself." Her friend suggested she go to the healer, a compassionate glassmaker. The glassmaker melts your cracks, and you heal from the inside out. He talks with you about the storm and helps you become a new creation. "Huh, I don't think so," said the cracked glass bowl. "I've heard of the glassmaker. They say it's a painful healing process, and I would rather not talk about what happened to me. Many did not survive the storm. Perhaps survival is enough." "Survival alone is not enough," said her friend. "Without the healing, you will remain broken and fragile. The glassmaker is patient and works with you as you endure the heat of the fire." Green Glass Bowl declined her friend's suggestion and continued to live in the misery of brokenness day after day. She didn't want to bother others with her problems, so she suffered alone silently. Then one morning she awoke and realized that the life she was living was not a life worth living. She decided to go to the glassmaker for the healing. She and her friend went together because everyone knows you don't try to pursue healing without the support of those who care. When she and her friend arrived, the glassmaker explained the process. He said, "You'll go in the oven, it will soften and melt your cracks. When the glass softens and melts, the cracks will then blend together and disappear. You'll become malleable. You can tell me what you want to look like at the end. You could be tall and thin, off-centered, perfectly balanced, short and broad, whatever. I can add colors to the green if you'd like a change in your hue, or I can mix swirls in with the green. You will be a new creation." "A new creation," said the bowl. "I can hardly imagine myself as anything but a cracked glass bowl. How will I know when you are finished?" "Oh, you'll tell me when you're finished. When you're satisfied with the results, I'll take you out of the fire, let you cool, and after cooling, your glass will be smooth. No cracks, no chips, no gouges. All that will be left is your memories of the storm." The green bowl told the glassmaker what she wanted to look like, and they worked together in and out of the hot oven. The heat was painful, and she cried out as she talked about the storm. But then she felt her outsides and insides start to soften. She relinquished control, tolerated the searing heat, and allowed the healing process to take over. It was the strangest feeling as her cracks disappeared. The glassmaker added the colors she had selected and shaped her carefully. Her very essence was being changed. The glassmaker took her out of the oven for the last time, and after only a few minutes, the now cooled lavender bluish green bowl was a work of art, a recreation. She had chosen a simple form with smooth flowing lines, swirls, and blends of color. She was now a bold statement and perfectly balanced. One small bubble of her green color remained unblended, a reminder of her former self. She offered thanks to the glassmaker for the healing and said, "I would not have believed that such a change was possible." Her friend, the blue bowl, was waiting and said, "I was going to ask you what took so long, but it's obvious. You are the same and different, a wonderful new creation." And they rejoiced together at the change. Perhaps this story will be a reminder that healing, although painful, is worth the effort. We all go through storms that leave us battered and broken, and survival is not enough. You are not alone. God is with you. And there are others ready and willing to support you in your healing. So when you are ready, I hope you will take a leap of faith, like the green bowl, and become a new creation. Healing is restorative. Body, mind, emotions, and spirit. We all have cracks and brokenness. That's what mental health problems are all about. Some are less visible than others. Healing is from within. And the healing, we seal the cracks with God's restoring love. God is the ultimate glassmaker. Unconditional, loving, grace-filled relationships with others. Having the support there is critical. We don't need to try to do it alone. Self-acceptance and changed perception of self is part of the healing, and treatment with therapy and medication, when needed, is also part of the healing.
Okay, I just want to thank all of our presenters. I want to spend about 8 minutes, I'm going to set my timer again, and open it up for any questions that you might want to ask in the public setting of me, of any of our mental health professionals, anything that you heard that you have a question about. We're going to entertain questions for a little while. And then if you have questions that you don't want to ask in the big group, just a reminder that we've got about 20 minutes built into our time tonight. If you want to come up and talk to any of us one-on-one, we can do that as well. But this is your time to ask questions, so go for it. Or have comments. Questions, comments? Yeah. Yeah.
I like the idea of so many things to help the healing process, particularly when you're stressed. But one thing that wasn't mentioned as much is the music.
Music.
Now,
yes.
I have to admit that I play the piano.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm affiliated with a lot of music things. But it's amazing now that I thought, what am I doing? I've got to pay more attention to this. And when I get my mind going and listening to this music, what a difference it makes.
Music is very
It's just one of
healing.
those things.
Music is very healing. Exercise is very healing. Meditation is very healing. Thank you for bringing some of those things in. Absolutely. Other questions, comments?
Holly, you
Yeah.
want to mention the toolkit that we're planning?
Yeah, I will at the close. Other questions, comments, concerns? I've been taught to wait 7 uncomfortable seconds. Yeah.
In all what you were talking about when things are going wrong and you're thinking, where is God when I need Him and not answering my prayer? Isn't that a time that you should look at that period of time as you trust in Him that does have a plan for you? Because not everything is all roses all the time.
That's right. That's right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And some of our hardest moments is really where God's healing can be the most powerful. And I want to speak to that. Actually, there was something in one of your presentations I wanted to bring up about, maybe it was your questions that came from you, Richard, about not feeling like you don't have faith. I want to just say to you that there are Sunday mornings that I don't feel it, okay? There are Sunday mornings. Hopefully they're not the Sundays that I'm preaching, but there are Sunday mornings when I'm not feeling it. But that's one of the beautiful things about corporate worship and being in community. In some of the most difficult times in my life, I was fortunate to not be working on Sunday mornings. And I was able to sit in a church, and I couldn't sing. I couldn't pray. I couldn't do those things without breaking down. But somebody next to me and their voice was my voice in that season. And so corporate worship is so powerful in those darkest moments where we need to kind of be reminded that we can trust. Saying the creed is extremely important. The Lord's Prayer is extremely important. Those kind of rituals of our faith that shape us can be some of how we get to God in those hardest moments. Great comment, great question.
On your PET scan, visuals there, somewhere in there you were saying how some things have to be treated medically and that sort of thing. How does a person go about making that call of like, oh, you need to take medication in order to be better?
Well, we're actually going to be addressing that in the weekly sessions coming up about how you, so when we talk about specific disorders, we're going to talk about what are the treatment options,
Right.
and how do you know which to select. So we're actually going to be addressing that, okay? So sometimes it depends on what your end goal is, what you're looking to come out with. Sometimes it depends on how immediate you need a response. So if you go to psychotherapy, that's not something that's going to turn you around in a week, right? Some medications can work faster, but then there's always downsides to medications, right? So everything is a balancing act, And in fact, many of these disorders are going to work best if you have combinations of approaches.
I've known of people that have just become so over-medicated that,
Oh, I agree.
yeah.
I agree.
And I saw the brain deals, they're real obvious. You gotta-
Unfortunately, in American society, we tend to, as a group, we tend to like medicines.
Well, to add on that, there's things like if serotonin is low, let's say, with depression, well, you can bump serotonin with exercise, with meditation, with music. So everything's on a continuum, and as we talk more in the following weeks, we'll talk about here's kind of normal or temporary symptoms, here's an acute, sudden onset of something that probably will pass in time, and then here's an enduring, more of a disorder that's really affecting your functioning, like your work, your sleep. So there's a continuum for everything.
Yeah, another question. Go ahead.
Okay, so with that kind of question, so like people put everybody antidepressants, and then when you quit taking them, it's like worse than you were on to them because of the side effects. And then people are relying on medicine just like you said. So, and then, yeah, so how can you really respond to that?
So antidepressants, so.
Let me make sure everybody heard the question. She's talking about antidepressants and coming off of them. And sometimes when you're coming off of them, the symptoms can be actually worse. So Dave's going to talk
So
about that.
many of the antidepressants, if you're on more than a minimal dose, you actually need to be tapered off them, or you will have a withdrawal from them, okay? And the withdrawal can, different people withdraw differently, and they can be very serious. People like very uncomfortable from, okay? So the other thing is, maybe the antidepressant was treating something that hasn't resolved now, and you go off the antidepressant and suddenly your original symptoms start flaring up again because the condition is not resolved and you were relying solely on an antidepressant. You weren't doing anything else like counseling or other approaches to deal with it. And so now you have nothing because you're off the antidepressant.
Yeah.
Right.
We got two questions back here. Yeah, yellow shirt and then Terry. What's your name? I know you and I can't think of your name.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, okay, Elizabeth. Sorry, I didn't.
What about, in the combination of disorders, what about mental disorders such as being on the autism spectrum or ADHD or things along those lines?
Yeah, I'm gonna kick back to our clinician.
So the other guys can jump in too. So we haven't really talked about ADHD and those sorts of things. So I would, everybody can jump in. So one thing is ADHD did not come out very prevalent in our group. It was one of the lower prevalence ones, so that's why we haven't specifically dealt with it. So my opinion, and others can chime in here, I think ADHD is probably overdiagnosed in our society, all right? And I think the new DSM-5 has set the bar too low for making that diagnosis, so we're overdiagnosing it. And remember, lots of things affect your ability to concentrate. Depression, anxiety, all substances, all sorts of things affect your ability to concentrate. And just because you're not concentrating doesn't mean you have ADHD, okay? And so that's part of the dilemma, is to tease out what's causing the problem with your concentration and not automatically think it's ADHD. The other thing is, in my opinion, anytime somebody is diagnosed with ADHD, the first approach is a behavioral approach. That's not the last approach. That should be the first approach before medications. So you guys can chime in.
Let me speak to the spectrum, autism spectrum, because, you know, if you have that as a kid, you're going to have that as an adult. Our son has autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's, but now it's called autism. It's all the same. And I've worked with kids and adults on the spectrum. The mental health issues that arise are often mood and anxiety related. So even though you're on autism spectrum, you get frustrated easily. You can have difficulty with stress. You have trouble with social relationships. You can get really depressed if you're on the spectrum. So a lot of the things about the other mental health conditions will apply to spectrum mental health symptoms. Does that make sense? Okay.
Terry, you had a question, and then we're going to shift.
I think it might be more of a comment than
Okay.
a question.
Yeah,
Or
no, of
not a
course.
remark.
The floor is yours.
So some of the questions about medication, from my own experience, medication doesn't necessarily, yes, there might be people that are over-medicated, yes, there might be people that experience withdrawal, but there's also the fact that these disorders are sitting in the corner doing push-ups when they're not being treated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if I am, like my own history involves eating disorders. So if I am doing all the things that are going to treat that and then I stop, my eating disorder is going to be like, waiting for me! You know what I mean? So I wanted to put,
Yeah, that's, yeah. Very good, very good, very good. Okay, I want to honor your time, and I want to kind of wrap us up. I want to remind you that we're going to be hanging around. Folk at this table and Kathy in the back is part of our mental health team. We're going to be here to visit with you if you have one-on-one questions or comments. Before I get into giving you some next step stuff, let me encourage you, if you've not done so, please fill out a note card with your name and an email address or contact information. And I'm going to ask you if you could put something on that card, a question that would be helpful to us is what do you need the church to be doing? I'm not telling you we're going to do what you're asking. What I am telling you is that we're at a stage of gathering information as we continue to develop programming. So if there's something on your mind that says it'd be great to have a quarterly prayer service around mental, I don't know what it is. But if there's anything that you can give us that would help us know more of how the church can be responding to mental health needs, that would be helpful. So next week, from 5 to 6:30 in this room, our mental health team will be here. There's going to be a self-assessment that you can take. So you'll sit down and you'll take it by yourself, you'll look at it, and then if you want to talk to any of us about what that revealed for you, we're not giving out diagnosis, but we're able to look at that with you and say, these may be some next steps that you want to consider. So if you're here tonight and you're like, I think I need to be looking at more of these things, 5 to 6:30 next week. 6:30, we'll be dealing with issues of childhood abuse. And each of the following, starting next Wednesday, each one of those nights, we'll have mental health professionals given the full kind of spectrum of what's normal to abnormal, talking about treatment. There will be a person that gives a testimony of how they are living with that disorder, thriving with it, and how their faith is a part of that. So know that that's coming. You talked about music therapy and music as something. In the spring, what we're hoping to do out of this initiative is develop some, what we're calling toolkit classes. We don't know what that means. But more positive spins on things that would help people that are living with mental illness. So things like yoga is already going on. Christ-centered yoga is already going on here. We're going to be probably looking at some things to do around stress management. We're going to use that. So know that there's some of these things that are helpful to all the different stressors and helps us have resilience. We're looking at doing some of those things in the church. In the back, there are a lot of resources for you. I want to point out just a couple so that you know they're back here. This is just a wonderful, wonderful resource that couldn't have been done without Kelly, who's standing up, who put together a whole bunch of resources in our community, and Sarah, who helped compile it to make a guide. This has resources of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, treatment centers, websites, resources for veterans, 12-step information. Pick this up. There's all kinds of wonderful pieces of information in that in here. There's also information for Stephen Ministry back here. If Bob and Callie, I think, are our only trained Stephen ministers who are here right now. Oh, and Diane, you snuck in. You snuck in. Stephen Ministry is not a therapeutic intervention, but it is a faithful pairing of you with one person who I describe as your spiritual cheerleader, a wonderful way to get through some of those dark moments in life with faith around you. So I point you to Bob, if you don't mind, or Callie or Diane, if you want to talk about Stephen Ministry when we finish. Those are the dates of the upcoming continuing conversations. They're all the top 5 things that our mental health survey revealed our congregation are dealing with. Survivors of child abuse, verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. We'll have an evening next Wednesday that we're dealing with that, and someone giving a testimony of how they have lived with that, like the glass bowl. They got reshaped and remade in a new creation. Trauma will be the next Wednesday. Addiction and substance abuse is the 19th. Depression is the 26th. Anxiety is the 3rd. If you're here and you're thinking, well, I just need to come to one of those, I'd love for you to come to one of them. But like Dave's presentation, which was so helpful, there's usually some comorbidities. Is that the right word? Yeah. The one day. So usually if you have one, you've got another one. So I think that's all my information for you guys tonight. I want to close us with prayer. And then those who are part of the team that are available for one-on-one conversations, if you'll come up here, and any of you are welcome to come and talk to us about anything you want to. So, would you join me in prayer? I'm going to ask you to grab somebody's hand. Let's pray together.
Get buried.
Let's pray. Oh, I think my timer's going to go off. I turned it off. There you go. God, thank you for laughter. Even in the midst of difficult things, you try to point us to joy. And so thank you for that little comic relief there. Most of all, thank you for the truth that you can make us new creations. That we don't have to hide where the hurts are. That we don't have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. But we can rely on you to guide us, Lord, in our faith, in our health care, and our mental health care. So I pray that those that are in this room that need to find resources, that you would give them the boldness to come up and ask one of us for help. Pray that you would guide us as a team, that we might be able to create space and solutions for people as they live with these very real experiences of brokenness. Remind us, Lord, that where there is suffering, you don't turn away. You are always there to bring us back into wholeness. So help us, Lord, go from this time into the abundant life that you have created for each of us. It's in the powerful name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.